Do you remember what our story was last week? We talked about the man named Zechariah and how he had to wait for what God told him was going to come true. Just like we're waiting for Christmas, the day when Jesus was born. This week, we are going to read the story of how Jesus was born and why that is so exciting for us. Our story this week is called Born in a Barn. Were you guys born in a barn? I wasn't born in a barn. Seems like a really strange place to be born. Let's see why baby Jesus was born in a barn. Do you remember Abraham? We might have talked about him a little bit a long time ago, but he's a man who God gave 3 promises to. The first one was that your children will become a great nation. The second was that that nation would have its own land all to itself. The third is that from that nation would come a blessing for the whole world. After 1,500 years, it's a long time, 2 of those promises had come true. Abraham's kids became the nation of Israel, and they got their own land, the promised land. But the blessing for the whole world? What was it? And when was it coming? Would it solve the problem of sin? Would it change the people of the world so that they could be friends with God again? The prophet Isaiah talked about the Messiah, a word that means anointed one. God anointed kings and very special leaders when he had an important job for them to do. But 400 years had passed since the time of Isaiah. 400 years without any new prophets. 400 years without any new messages from God. And the Israelites were getting tired of waiting for their special leader. Oh, where was that blessing? Some of the Israelites were starting to lose hope. But then something incredible happened. An angel appeared to a young woman named Mary. You will have a son, the angel said. How will this be? Mary asked. I'm not even married. It's true, Mary wasn't married. She had promised to marry a man named Joseph, but they weren't married yet. Then the angel said something amazing. He told Mary the baby's father would be God himself. Her baby would be the Son of God. Pretty wild, right? You would think that Mary would have passed out and fallen on the floor right then. But Mary was brave. She trusted God. I am the servant of the Lord, she said. May this happen just as you have said. Then the angel said one more thing to Mary. He said the baby's name would be Jesus. When it was almost time for the baby to come, Joseph and Mary traveled to Bethlehem. They needed somewhere to stay, a nice place for Mary to have her baby. If this baby really was God's own son, he should be born in a palace, right? In a big, beautiful palace surrounded by fancy people wearing fancy clothes. After all, this baby was the Son of God. But Mary didn't have her baby in a fancy palace or in a nice warm inn by a fire. No, Mary had her baby in a barn for animals. Mary's baby, Jesus, wasn't surrounded by fancy people. He was surrounded by sheep and goats and chickens. If this was God's blessing for the world, the blessing Israel had been waiting for almost 2,000 years, this wasn't the way people were expecting it to happen. Then more angels showed up, a whole bunch of them, and they sang and celebrated the birth of a new king, the birth of Jesus. Where do you think God's mighty angels announced the birth of his son? Probably in the biggest city to the world's most important people, right? To kings and generals, to rich, important, fancy people. But that wasn't where the angels sang of Jesus' birth. This amazing group of God's messengers appeared in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere. And they didn't sing to kings and rich folks, they sang to shepherds, to a group of dirty, smelly guys who took care of dirty, smelly sheep. God showed the world his power, who he really was, not in an army, but in a baby. Not in a palace, but in a stable. Not to kings and rich people, but to shepherds. God's rescue plan was happening. His kingdom was on the move. But God was announcing very clearly that this blessing for the world wasn't going to be what people expected. This tiny little baby born in a stable, celebrated by shepherds, was going to turn the whole world upside down. Wow, pretty cool, right? The way that Jesus was born wasn't the way we were expecting it to happen, right? But God had a plan for Jesus and a reason that Jesus was born in the stable. Thanks for joining. I'll see you next time.